Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Mepkin Abbey's Online Retreat Center. I'm Maureen Renaud, and I'll be sitting in for Joy this evening, who is enjoying a much-deserved holiday. Before we get started, I wanted to review some Zoom basics for those who may be new. This evening, we will be using the breakout room feature, and at the appropriate time, a message on the screen will invite you into the breakout room. And towards the end of that allotted time, that breakout session, a message will give you an announcement that you have a minute to wrap up. And then you'll be returned to the main session by the system. Chat will be available during this evening's lecture. If you'd like to ask a question, please do so by clicking on chat at the bottom bar at the bottom of your screen, and that will allow you to raise your hand as an icon for Mr. Thralls to see, or you can raise your real hand on screen and be seen. And finally, please mute yourself at all times unless you are speaking. And now I will hand off to Father Garrick to introduce our speaker. Father Garrick?
Thank you very much, Maureen, and a real cordial welcome to all of you. It's nice to see some familiar Zoom faces, and so it's a real honor to invite you to this evening's lecture on vast space, vast self, reflections on spirituality and commuting in New York. I first got introduced to our speaker, Chad Thralls, tonight in his wonderful book, Deep Calls to Deep. And as I read that book and found out a little bit more about him, I was intrigued by his working at seeing how public spaces, the spirituality of public spaces. So when I talked to him about inviting him to, at Meppingen, at least in a Zoom fashion, he said he was working on an article this summer on that very topic, and that he would be willing to share some of his reflections with us this evening. So Chad is a theologian, and he currently holds, is in a teaching fellow in the university core curriculum at Seton Hall University in New Jersey. His interests include the history of Christian contemplative spirituality, the practice of contemplation, and contemplative pedagogy, and how practice of contemplative spirituality is influenced by place. So specifically the city. So as I referred to his other wonderful book, Deep Calls to Deep, we hope to maybe bring him back to talk more about that book at some later time, where he explores mysticism, scripture, and contemplation. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chad, and welcome you to our Zoom lecture this evening.
Thank you, Father Gary. It's good to be with you. Before I forget, if you have a question and I'm kind of going, feel free to turn on your microphone and say something and interrupt me. That won't bother me at all. Okay. So I like to begin with a little contemplation to set the tone for what we're going to be talking about tonight. So contemplation is simply the practice of being present. In Luke chapter 9, Jesus says, "No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God." In Luke chapter 6, he says, "Don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own." When we are present, we're not reflecting on what didn't go well yesterday, or more importantly, what we need to do tomorrow. We are intentionally present in this moment. God is the subtle depth of everything, and we can become aware of this depth when we are present. What makes this difficult is that our minds aren't naturally comfortable with silence and stillness. The clutter in our minds makes us restless. As Martin Laird teaches, contemplation helps us release the clutter in our minds so that we can become aware of who we really are. And as we practice, we learn that we are vastness, that God is vastness, and that our vastness participates in the vastness of God. So I begin my college classes with meditation, and what I teach my students is simply to count their breaths, or choose a word or short phrase to repeat in coordination with their breathing. I imagine that if you found your way to this talk, that you've probably done this before. Does anyone have any questions about Christian contemplation before we practice it for a couple minutes ourselves? I didn't figure we would in this crowd. All right, so sit up straight in your chair with both feet on the floor. Want your back and neck to be straight. I have a meditation bell app on my phone. The bell will ring, and then 4 minutes later, it will ring again. 4 short minutes. And then we'll share some thoughts. Here we go. So before I jump in, I want to provide a little context to some of the things I'll be talking about briefly. Syriac is one of the three great languages of early Christianity. The other two are Greek and Latin. Syriac is a dialect of Aramaic that flourished on the eastern edge of the Roman Empire for 1,000 years and is still used by Christians today who trace their origins to the Syriac-speaking parts of the Middle East that stretch from modern-day Lebanon to Iran. So Syriac studies is a part of church history it's becoming more prominent and that better known than it was a generation ago. Another preliminary point. In the discipline of Christian spirituality, one of the more interesting issues that scholars have addressed in the last 20 years is how place and landscape influence the practice of spirituality. So how do the landscapes in which we live our lives shape our understanding of God and ourselves? Many writers are fond of wild places in the Western United States with their big skies, tall mountains, and vast deserts. Beautiful places like these certainly can be inspiring. My wife is from Colorado, so I'm well aware, but visiting them is more like a retreat. Most of us don't live there. In this presentation, I'm interested in how the landscapes of our daily lives impact the way we view ourselves and envision how we're related to God. The landscape I live in is the city. I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan and travel by subway and commuter train to New Jersey for work. The trip takes about an hour and 15 minutes. I usually teach Tuesday, Thursday classes, so I normally only have to go to campus 2 days a week. Thank goodness. In what follows, I'll be sharing my experience, what it's like to inhabit the landscape I live in. After I share, I'll be interested in how my experience relates to yours. Is this just true for me, or is it also true for you? And how is it different for you than from my experience? Okay, so as Father Garrick said, the title I gave this is Vast Space, Vast Self, Reflections on Spirituality and Commuting in New York. I think I have the market on this topic so far cornered, and I've not read much on spirituality and commuting. Okay, so if you ask New Yorkers which public space they despise the most in the city, many, including myself, would say Penn Station. It used to be tied for last place with LaGuardia Airport, but LGA is currently being renovated. Those who arrive by rail from the north enter the city through the ornate Grand Central Terminal. I, on the other hand, have worked in New Jersey for the past decade. Therefore, the transit hub I use in my daily commute is Pennsylvania Station. Penn Station is located underneath Madison Square Garden. It is the busiest train station in the United States, and its 2 subterranean levels are crowded with commuters, dimly lit and confusingly laid out. A friend likens the experience of navigating its low ceilings and dark corridors to the feeling rats must have inside a maze. Human beings value spirituality and commuting quite differently. One seems sacred, the other profane. Our spirituality encompasses our highest ideals, practices, and experiences. It includes those activities we consciously engage in to nurture our connection to the sacred, to other people, and to the natural world. Commuting, on the other hand, is a necessary evil. Though the pandemic gave many a break from the time and energy they spend traveling to work, essential workers did not get one. And in ordinary times, most people have to leave home to travel to their place of employment, procure food and other necessities, and engage in recreation. Despite the fact that we usually prefer not to devote time and energy to it, commuting occurs between all the activities and tasks that fill our schedules. Therefore, it is worth considering how we are shaped by the practice of moving between the different places we need to go in everyday life. To bring spirituality and commuting into conversation, the question I will explore this evening is this: can the size and scale of the urban spaces through which commuters travel actually open the human spirit to contemplation? I'll say that again. Can the size and scale of the urban spaces through which commuters travel actually open the human spirit to contemplation? The size of the spaces that people move through is relevant because cities are full of small, cramped spaces. Small apartments, small grocery stores, small restaurants. Crowded sidewalks limit our space to walk around. Packed subway cars compress us together with strangers. Tall buildings limit our view of the sky. And of course, there's nowhere to park. At the same time, cities also contain a variety of open spaces, such as plazas, parks, playgrounds, riverfronts, rooftops, community gardens, and vacant lots. The spaces where we spend our time provide a spiritual landscape to our lives. They establish the horizon our spiritual selves inhabit. In my experience, spending large amounts of time in small indoor spaces narrows my focus to myself and my problems. It promotes rumination on the things in my life that are not going as well as I would prefer. In contrast, I feel very differently about what's happening in my life when I'm outside, especially outside in an open space like a park. The Psalms articulate a similar experience of space. For example, Psalm 18 depicts the person in peril as one who is bound or constricted. To be in trouble is to be in a tight spot. To describe the experience of deliverance from peril, verse 19 states, God brought me out into a broad place. The biblical scholar Soren Holst refers to this motif in the Psalms as narrowness as problem and wideness as solution. Augustine famously described human beings as curved in on themselves. Contemplative spirituality seeks to reverse this situation. It calls us to surrender our preoccupation with self. Its goal is not to cultivate the small self, which is attached to my judgments, my preferences, and my plans. Instead, the goal of the contemplative life is to nurture the unbounded or expansive self, the inner self that is not confined by self-preoccupation, but released from it into an awareness of its connection with God, other people, and the natural world. My claim tonight is that open spaces evoke this vast self. Thus, the simple act of seeking out open spaces as we move through our cities can be a contemplative practice, because these vast spaces communicate the vastness and boundlessness of God to us and reveal that the human self can participate in this vastness. Whenever we spend time in them, they open us to this realization. We give them a chance to show us that there's more to the self than its to-do lists and worries about whether everything in our lives is going to turn out okay. I make this claim from experience. It began unconsciously at first. Commuters use many different types of transportation to get around the city. One of the things I love about New York is that I can walk to most of the places I need to go. When I first moved here, in going about my daily errands on foot in the city, I found myself choosing paths that travel alongside a park, playground, or vacant lot. Eventually, it became a conscious practice. Now, whenever I walk somewhere in the city, I rarely choose the most direct route. I try to walk through a park or other green or open space on my way to the grocery store, to drop my son off at school, or to the post office. As I say this, I wonder if this is just true for me. Do open spaces put other people in a different mental state too? Do they make others feel differently about the things on their to-do lists? If so, how do open spaces evoke the expansive self? What's the mechanism by which open spaces in our cities reveal the vastness of the self and its correspondence to the divine? So that's what I'm trying to do here, is the how. This is my experience. I feel differently when I'm outside. So how does this work? Why does this work? And is it just true for me? So one of the great gifts the mystics provide is language that depicts the subtle relationship between God and the inner self. Bernard McGinn notes that Christian mystics have used the themes of ocean and desert to suggest aspects of the divine nature. Evagrius, for example, describes mystical union using ocean symbolism. He writes, when minds flow back into him like torrents into the sea, he changes them all completely into his nature, color, and taste. They will no longer be many but one in his unending and inseparable unity. So because of its prominence in scripture, Western mystics have used desert imagery more frequently than symbols of ocean or sea. The key biblical text on which they grounded their reflections was Hosea 2:14, which reads, I will lead her into the desert. There I will speak tenderly to her. Mystical authors have used the metaphor of the desert to convey a variety of meanings, including the emptiness of the contemplative purified from worldly concern, the utter simplicity and unknowability of the divine, as well as the hidden mystery of the depths of the human soul, and the limitless and unbounded character of the divine. It is the limitless and unbounded aspect of the divine nature that attracts me as I navigate both small and vast spaces here in New York. Another symbol commonly used in the contemplative tradition is the mirror. This metaphor functions within a web of images that include the image of God, the heart, the inner self, and the divine light. So I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about this image of the mirror. I find it particularly fascinating. Genesis 1:26 says that God created human beings in the image and likeness of God. The text does not explain what this means, but being created in God's image suggests that we're related to God in an intrinsic fashion. To be created in the image of God means that something in our essence is fundamentally connected to God. This grants us a dignity and a potential for relationship, which is inherent in what it means to be human. Matthew 5:8 says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Sebastian Brock is a scholar of Syriac Christianity. He points out that for Eastern Christian writers, the heart is the center of the entire person, not just the emotions. Therefore, the heart is the metaphor they use for the inner or higher self. The heart is also a sense faculty. Just as our senses of hearing, sight, taste, touch, and smell give us information about the world around us, the heart is that in us that registers spiritual awareness. Some of these writers even use the language of the eye of the heart to indicate that the inner self is the faculty that becomes aware of the divine. Thus, the heart is our organ of spiritual perception. In addition, Eastern Christian writers use the imagery of light to represent their awareness of God. As the tradition developed, these writers often depicted their consciousness of God as the bright light Jesus' disciples witnessed at the Transfiguration on Mount Tabor in the Synoptic Gospels. These writers are not saying that they experience God as a bright light. They're using the metaphor of light to indicate their profound awareness of the divine. So for Sebastian Brock, the biblical theme of repentance connects the metaphors of the inner self as image of God and the divine light. According to Brock, in its original state, the soul possessed its own natural beauty. In other words, the divine image in which human beings are created. Consequently, the whole aim of the spiritual path is to return to this primordial state and to restore the lost image. For this process, what is required is constant repentance or returning. Once something of the soul's natural beauty has been achieved, then it will begin to become aware of the divine light shining out within itself. So to suggest how through repentance the inner self comes to resemble God, some Syriac writers use the imagery of the interior mirror. Brock points out that mirrors in antiquity were not made of glass, but of metal. And in order to function properly, they needed to be kept continuously in a high state of polish. So he outlines the mirroring process in 4 stages. In the first stage, as Genesis 1:26 states, human beings are created in the image of God. And the image functions like a second at the fall, which represents the misuse of the gift of free will. The image mirror no longer functions properly, being overlaid with rust and grime. The dirty mirror symbolizes a state of unawareness of God. The goal of the third stage is to clean the surface of the tarnished mirror. As Brock puts it, the rusted metal mirror needs to be brought back into a state of high polish, so that more and more it reflects the divine light that falls on it. In the course of polishing, the mirror becomes progressively more capable of reflecting the divine image in which the mirror was originally created. In the fourth and final stage, the mirror of the heart is fully polished, a state which is only very rarely and then only momentarily reached in this life. Gregory of Nyssa also uses the metaphor of the inner self as a mirror. He writes that the heart is a mirror that reflects whatever you put in front of it. For him, if you place something ugly, in his words, like a frog or toad in front of it, the mirror will reflect ugliness. If you set a purified mirror in front of the light of Christ, the mirror reflects this light. For Gregory, what tarnishes the soul's mirror is passionate thoughts. A mirror cleansed of the passions reflects the light. It represents the experience of God by the inner self. So for Gregory, the heart mirrors whatever you put in front of it. When we stay inside our small apartments, our to-do lists and dirty dishes appear in our mirrors. When we intentionally seek out open spaces, our hearts mirror the vastness before them. When the pandemic closed down New York in March of 2020, my small weekly centering prayer group kept meeting in person. Out of caution, I didn't take the subway, but instead walked the 2 miles north to the church where the group meets. Instead of hiking up Amsterdam Avenue, I traveled through Riverside Park. As the spring progressed, I got to witness different blooming glories, from the daffodils and tulips to the magnolias, eastern redbuds, and dogwoods. My family moved over the summer, and in the spring of 2021, as I walked north to the church through Central Park, I imagined my heart as a mirror that reflected the blossoms of the cherry trees along the western edge of the reservoir back to themselves. As Martin Laird says about how the self experiences itself through the practice of contemplation, it felt like luminous vastness gazing into luminous vastness. For Gregory of Nyssa, the passions interrupt the mirroring process. As we've seen, a clean mirror reflects light, while a dirty one does not. What does the contemplative tradition mean by the passions that tarnish our inner mirrors? Invoking the language of the Psalms, Thomas Merton describes the passions as care. He writes, "It is sometimes possible to see that things become transparent. They are no longer opaque, and they no longer hide God. We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent, and God is shining through it all the time. And this is something we are not able to see. But if we abandon ourselves to Him and forget ourselves, we see it sometimes. That God manifests Himself everywhere, in everything, in people and things and in nature. So that it becomes very obvious that God is everywhere, is in everything, and we cannot be without God. You cannot be without God. What is it that makes the world opaque? It is care. We are devoured by care. Care about our job, care about our life of prayer, care about how we are getting on, care about what other people are doing, care about this, care about that. When Merton reached for a word to pinpoint why we are often oblivious to the presence of God and everything around us, he chose the biblical term care. What he means by care is all the everyday plans, concerns, fears, and anxieties that preoccupy our minds. Care is what tarnishes our inner mirror and prevents it from reflecting the light. Henry David Thoreau describes how care disrupts his practice of walking, one of Merton's favorite authors. In Thoreau's essay titled Walking, He doesn't write about walking in terms of commuting somewhere he needs to go. He walks simply because he enjoys being in the woods. For him, I am alarmed when it happens that I have walked a mile into the woods bodily without getting there in spirit. In my afternoon walk, I gladly forget all my morning occupations and obligations to society. But it sometimes happens that I cannot easily shake off the village. The thought of some work will run in my head, and I am not where my body is. I am out of my senses. What business have I in the woods if I am thinking of something out of the woods? For Thoreau, care is a strategy our minds use to avoid being present, to avoid being where our bodies are. His essay is a reminder to himself, as well as to his readers, that he needs to get out of his head and engage the woods with his senses. At the end of the piece, he recommends viewing the crowing of the rooster as a tool to becoming present, akin to a mindfulness bell. He contrasts our well-worn habits of thought with the rooster's crow, which is always fresh. If we could simply hear it, we would become present and receive the gospel according to this moment. The gospel according to this moment. The contemporary Orthodox theologian Maximus Constus also addresses how passions cloud our vision. To convey the relationship between the creator and individual created things, he uses the language of surface and depth. For him, everything has a surface and a depth, and God is present as the depth of everything. The problem is that we're attracted to surfaces. He writes, "We are fascinated by appearances, and the exhilaration of surfaces prevents a deeper engagement with whatever is not immediately evident to the senses. In our culture of organized distractions, the depth of things has largely receded from our view, leaving behind a flattened and hollowed out shell of appearances. With our eyes immobilized by our mobile devices, we live our lives on the surface in a fruitless search for meaning and fulfillment." In this piece, Constus describes a passion as the mind's propensity to attach itself to surfaces. This attachment obscures the depth present within things. Creation should be a theophany in which the divine can be perceived at the center of everything, but this vision is clouded by the passions which are fixated on surface appearances. According to Gregory of Nyssa, the passions tarnish the surface of our interior mirrors. For me, my mirror is often sullied by the thoughts that circle around my mind about what could be going better in my life. This is especially true when I spend most of my time indoors. My suggestion tonight is that open spaces overwhelm this process. In my experience, the dirt on the mirror of the heart does not prevent it from reflecting the light as much when I'm outside. My cares can still dirty my inner mirror when I'm outdoors, but the size and scale of open spaces cut through the fog of my passionate thoughts. Why? Because the bright spaciousness of vast spaces overwhelms the pettiness of my problems. Being in an open space facilitates the releasing of thoughts that keep my mind confined to my superficial concerns and prevent me from seeing the divine shining out from the depth of things. One of the desert monks put it this way: when you are moved by thoughts that distress you and that you cannot chase away sufficiently, go outside into the fresh air and they will leave you. Now, in case you're suspicious of my spiritual take on this, psychologists are also exploring how open spaces promote mental health. I'm not a psychologist, but one of the distinctions that psychologists are drawing is between directed attention and involuntary attention. So directed attention is the active attention we devote to specific tasks during the day. Involuntary attention is the effortless is an effortless response to interesting stimuli. So your mind, when it's not consciously engaged in a task, it engages in what they call soft fascination. So when you're looking at the world as a task, you are looking at it something to problem solve. But if you're looking at something with soft fascination, you're just taking it in. You're not there to fix anything. And when your mind is engaged in soft fascination, it allows the mind to relax in a way that being in your apartment in front of your computer does not allow you to. So in relation to the practice of contemplation, the metaphor of the mirror does not indicate appearance. God is not an object that can be viewed on its surface. Instead of appearance, the metaphor signifies participation. Bernard McGinn observes that a variety of medieval mystics represent God and the soul as abysses to suggest the profound depths of both. For these writers, the goal of the spiritual life is to unite the two abysses. An abyss being a profound depth without bottom. Open spaces are physical analogies of the unbounded character of the divine that, when reflected in our mirrors, allow us to experience their vast character within ourselves. Because open spaces facilitate the release of passionately held thoughts, they allow the inner mirror of the heart to participate in the vastness of the divine. They allow us to feel the expansiveness that Psalm 18:9 describes, which reads, "He brought me out into a broad place. He delivered me because he delighted in me." Mirroring, then, is not only the mechanism by which we synchronize with the built environment of the cities we move through in our daily commute. It is a depiction of what the practice of contemplation looks like as we travel through a spacious landscape. So I began this presentation with an indictment of Penn Station. It's not hard, really. But the story has recently become more complicated. In January of 2021, the Moynihan train hall opened across 8th Avenue from Pennsylvania Station. Moynihan does not fully replace Penn. It does not offer access to all the tracks used by the 3 rail carriers that operate out of Penn Station. But for travelers using Amtrak and some riders of the Long Island Railroad, their experience of entering and exiting New York could not be more different than it was when they used Penn. Excuse me. While Penn Station is underground, Moynihan is above ground. The roof is made of glass and steel, so it lets natural light in. On my initial visit, my first impression was not with any of the impressive design features or art installations. It was how bright and open the space is. If navigating the dark corridors of Penn Station elicits the captivity depicted in Psalm 18, walking through Moynihan's light-filled atrium evokes the transfiguration. In the horse-drawn carriages that give tourists a ride around Central Park, blinders prevent the horses from becoming distracted. They focus the horses on the road in front of them. When I spend all my time indoors, the ceiling of my apartment acts as a blinder that keeps me focused on what I need to do next. Going outside to an open space takes the blinders off. I don't feel so small, so curved in on myself and my to-do list. I feel less preoccupied with my concerns and feel myself expand. I feel my inner self mirror the calm surface of the lake in Central Park or the Hudson River in Riverside Park. The much greater size of the lake compared to my apartment frees my mind and reveals that my inner self is not a cramped, constricted, and cluttered source of anxiety. It is bigger than this. Its true self is vast. It mirrors the boundlessness of God, who the mystics describe using images of ocean and desert. Right before the world closed down because of the virus, I presented the thesis of this presentation in a public forum. In the question and answer session, one student commented, "I think it's time for you to leave the city." Suburban indoor spaces are larger, but they are not the open spaces I speak of here. They are bigger, but not big enough to evoke the vast self. Commuting by car may insulate us to a degree from the inconsiderateness of others, but it doesn't expose us to vast space either. I think open spaces are important in all of our lives, especially those who live in cities. Despite the large scale of cities like New York, the vast majority of those who live in them spend their time in small, crowded spaces, including the inside of their own heads. Open spaces, on the other hand, give the soul room to breathe. They allow the mind to relax. Parks and other green spaces are essential to the mental health of city dwellers. Rather than that I need to leave the city, I think what my experience reveals is that all neighborhoods in our cities need to have open spaces, and that one can cultivate the contemplative self by frequenting them. Okay, so I'm interested to see what you think about all this. So is this some curious tale of some guy who lives in a different place? Or is my experience true for you too? Does your inner self mirror the landscape in which you find yourself? And what kind of physical landscape do you experience God most deeply? I'll be interested to see what you think about this proposal I'm bringing forth here this evening.
Chad, this is Maureen. Are you asking for questions or do you want to send it into breakout?
I think breakout groups would be great.
Okay. And I'm just to confirm, I'm going to hold at 2 per room, or there's 22 people here or 20 people. Would you like 3 per room?
I think you can get in greater depth if there's fewer people.
Okay, 2 it is. Hold on, everybody. You'll be going into your room shortly.
So this is a moment when I teach my classes, when the whole getting the breakout groups thing going. If you remember David Letterman, it would be a perfect time to have like a Paul Schaefer person who's like got a little band who's playing a little song, that the exit music, the breakout. I think that would be funny, but I thought that would be fun. So sometimes I like tap a little tune out on the podium in the classroom, but this is a contemplative group, so maybe I should keep the silence.
And we're away.
So does anyone so does anyone have anything they'd like to share from their groups, or have any questions or comments that you know, you've been so patient for the last hour and you just really need to let this guy have a piece of your mind? You know, this is your chance. This is the chance you've been waiting for. I'm interested to see if anyone thinks what I'm saying is doesn't quite feel right.
Can we just speak out, or do you want us to raise our hands or something?
God, just go ahead and.
We were just talking, Joseph and I, about how about the child's awareness and how children don't have concerns like adults do, and maybe we were trying to get at the nature of awareness. And he said, maybe it's like the mirror, and you know, we have to polish the mirror, and then there's that clarity of the mirror. So I just thought that was a lovely place we got to.
Nice. I like that. That's fun. I like that.
I like the I like the beauty of the images that you created for us. As we were in the breakout, they caused me, however, to see those situations where we are constricted or in restriction or in some type of confinement, and still find the vastness of God.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many aspects to any. These are just metaphors, right? And so we're just using language to point to something, but that's a great point in that. I mean, the flip side of what you're saying is that some people have to go through Penn Station, right? Some people have to go in tight. Some people experience tight spots in their lives, and they don't feel immediately the vastness, the expansiveness. That doesn't mean that God is not there with them in those moments. So that you're right. The metaphor it's not all encompassing. It doesn't address everything. That's a great point.
So Kathleen said I should bring this up. I live out in the country, actually, in vast spaces, and really enjoy it. But my one and only trip to New York City, coming in through Penn Station and doing a pilgrimage all over the place to, being surprised because I was lost and didn't know uptown from downtown, and came up and saw Central Park, which is gorgeous, but so was the neighborhood where Dorothy Day lived, or where Thomas Merton walked, or the ethnic neighborhoods, or even Times Square. It was all just beautiful to me. Even the tight spaces in the little cafes, and I don't know, I think it just depends. I think if I were living there, all the time, maybe I'd have a different perception, but it was magical to me, and it was spiritual because it was a pilgrimage.
That's a good point, Sarah. I think that if we had a native New Yorker here, like the guy I share an office with is from Queens, and he would think what I'm saying is crazy. Like that I grew up in a small town in West Virginia. And so the hills are I guess my native landscape, and so maybe this is just a idiosyncratic mountain boy who finds himself got a job in New Jersey and lives in this place. But I think you're right. I mean, I think that a native New Yorker would say that the energy of the city makes them feel alive. And the amount of the people on the subway or in the restaurants or in the cafes or Madison Square Garden, whatever it is, they just feel like vibrating with energy. And I'm not saying I don't feel that way, but I guess what I'm trying to do here is not to denigrate the city, is to just say that there are analogies between the places we find ourselves in different mental states, and that's that's sort of the argument, rather than saying that cities are bad, open spaces are, open spaces are great wherever they're found, but energy and people are great too. So it's more about how you're using where you are to be present to the depth of every moment.
Chad, thank you. I was in Central Park on Saturday,
Oh,
and it is no longer a vast space. It was packed. If you know what Saturday was like, it was a
gorgeous.
glorious day.
You got a great weekend for weather.
I know. And I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up in the Bronx.
Oh, wow.
My comment on this, like, I almost felt like I had to go to a vast space like Charleston and Nemkin, larger vast spaces, in order to be taught how to contemplate. Because sometimes growing up, and I went all through Catholic school, right through college, I was really, you always had to just be on, I don't want to say on edge, but so not aware, but alert. And that often you just were not trained, taught, or shown that there's another way. You could perhaps take that other road and block in order to do that. So I think what you're doing is great, because it could be a hint for so many people, because I think contemplation doesn't just fall on you sometimes. It's almost like it's offered and then you say yes. So I don't know where that lands with you, but that's just my 2 cents.
I think that's fantastic. I think that, Kathleen, as you've experienced, I think when you're standing on the sidewalk and you look ahead and there's the countdown clocks that tell you when you can cross, that makes you want to walk faster so you don't have to stand there and wait. And then and that's your entire day, is you're moving a little bit faster to get across the street, or to get in this little space, this little bit of space that you can get in, and you just keep moving faster and faster, and then at the end of the day, you're just exhausted. So you have.
Great. Well, thank you for coming from, was it West Virginia, and giving us some of your wisdom. Thank you.
Oh, Kathleen, thank you.
I'll say hello, Chad. I'm Doug. I'm also in New York City with you, and I happen to be in Queens, which you just mentioned a moment ago.
Nice.
And I've been a New York City tour guide for over 20 years.
Oh my goodness.
And what it made me just think of was, so you talked about, cramped. Let's start with the cramped apartment. So you go from the cramped apartment to a slightly more open space and a sidewalk, but then the sidewalk opens up to a playground. The playground opens up to a park. So there's this progression of opening. And then you go into Moynihan Hall, which, while an enclosed environment, is an expansive interior, into an expansive interior, contemplative space. And I've often, as a tour guide, or as a New Yorker for that matter, had the experience of feeling that deep opening when I get off the island onto the ferry boat, taking a group out to the Statue of Liberty. Because now I have some perspective. It's like, that's right. I've been on an island, and now I can see. I have a sense of perception of where I've been and where I am. I'm away from it, right? The distance that we seek to sort of cultivate within our own selves, to witness ourself on the contemplative journey. And then there's that step further. I remember going to Yellowstone Park and thinking, this is the field trip that I never had, that I wish I had. This even greater openness of nature, or the Grand Canyon. And I'll take it to its sort of apex, which is the idea of, right, that what astronauts have shared with us, leaving the planet and going into the ultimate open space, and looking back on Earth, the way I look back on the island of Manhattan, the way we look back at the cramped apartment, that there's always that greater perspective and that greater openness. And so I think what you're describing in some ways is an element of the human condition, you know, that you're mirroring through landscape, an aspect of the human condition's yearning to touch that vastness of God. So it's wonderful work you're doing. Thank you.
I think you said it better than I did, Doug, frankly. I like that. Doug reminded me of something. I grew up in the suburbs, and so I'm not. This is not an apology for cities, really. It's more of a thinking about your own mental life. And so I think the suburbs, at least where I grew up in the suburbs, you're tricked into thinking that you live near nature. But if you don't get out in it, it doesn't do you any good. If you're in your house all the time, even if you live closer to nature, if I lived, an hour north of here, if I lived in Peekskill, Doug, right, it would be a lot easier to go into the woods. But if I never left my living room, it wouldn't be doing me any good. So I think that wherever we are, we have to, I guess what I'm saying is that wherever we are, it's when I tell my students, like in the spring, I'm like, go outside. That's how I end almost every class in the spring or in the fall. Go see the leaves changing colors. If you got to get out of your heads. And I think that, as I was saying in the breakout group, by the way, the people in my breakout group were lovely humans. I initially said that I didn't want to do the breakout groups, but then it was really great experience. But sorry, forgot what I was going to say.
Chad, I had another experience of vastness. I flew in the Air Force for 20 years.
Oh,
and
wow.
I always loved going up in the sky. And now, almost any day, if I need that sense of vastness, I just look up at the sky.
Lester, I love that. My wife is from Colorado, so everything is bigger out in the West. But sometimes I have this 20-minute. So I take the subway to Penn Station, and then I take a 30-minute commuter train, and then I have a 15-minute walk through the suburbs in New Jersey. And it's such a different context than where I live. It's just very calming. And so I just look up at the sky. And if you notice, if it's not a cloudy day, the blue sky is all connected, right? It's all connected, this neighborhood, that neighborhood, over here, over there. As far as you can see, it's blue. And none of the things I'm thinking about matter as much, right? Do I have is this lecture going to be great? It doesn't really matter. Look at how blue the sky is. So I'm totally with you, Lester. I completely agree.
I just wanted to share that I think that for me, the epiphany in your talk came when you brought out the quotes from Thoreau's essay on walking, because it's at the end, just as you said, it doesn't do you any good, no matter how close you are to nature, if you're not aware of it. And it's not even a matter of being in it, as Thoreau points out. What right do I have to be in the woods if my mind is in the village? And I thought in the context of the mystics and the contemplative tradition, I always had this yearning to be one of the, desert fathers and mothers, because I always feel like they really got it, what we're all supposed to know. But then I thought to myself, what difference would it make if I went out in the desert? My mind would still be the rabbit brain going, a million miles an hour. And I don't remember which of the, I'm sure some of you will know instantly, the famous quote of, and I don't remember whose it was, but who said, go into your cell and you'll learn everything you need to learn, everything you need to know. And I'm not sure which one of the contemplatives that was who gave that, who told the monks that, but it's so, and then I think of St. John of the Cross, who couldn't sit down or stand upright or lie down, who's in that strange position when he was imprisoned, and that's when his greatest works were conceived. So it depends so much on one's frame of mind and one's attitude. And I remember when I was first learning centering prayer, people in the centering prayer group said, well, the real key to whether or not you're there, you've gotten it, you're a good centering prayer person, is if you can do it in a crowded departure lounge in an airport. And I thought, okay, I'm not there yet. I don't know if I ever will be. So I think, to me, Thoreau said it so eloquently, and it's so true.
That's my favorite quote in the paper, by the way. I love that. I remember when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, that is so good.
Hi, this is Scott. I just wanted to thank you all for this, just for people's comments and for what people have said, for what you spoke, Chad, just everybody. It was like just listening to everybody has been just a real experience of and what a lot of what I've heard is it's an internal experience no matter where we are, but it's also important to experience things outside ourselves. And one individual spoke of it as being kind of a progression. And the thought that came to me was kind of it being kind of an integration of all these different experiences. So when I'm out in the ocean, I'm experiencing that. It's phenomenal. But I really do look forward to getting back to my small space where I can also meet God. So it seems like it's all those experiences play into that. It's almost like an integration of all those. And the last thought about that, which is maybe a little bit different than what people are saying, is sometimes I have experienced that deepest sense of vastness has been in the midst, even if I'm in a crowd of people, but it's in the midst of a crowd of deep diversity, where I'm among a group of people of different ethnicity, different race, different cultures. And I experience that vastness through all those lives and all those people. And for me, that's a kind of a different vastness. I think of Revelations, the picture of all these tribes and nations and people of every race and color worshiping together. And that's a vastness that it's also an intimacy, but it's a vastness that for me has been one of the deeper experiences. So, but thank you for everybody.
Thank you, Scott. Great comments. I'm impressed with the contemplative literacy of this group, by the way, Father Garrick.
Well, I wanted to come in on an observation that Vance made when I talked to him. He talked about how paintings of landscapes can draw him into the vastness. Do you have any reflections on that?
Wow.
So you can be in a tight space, but being called into a vast space at the same time.
That's an interesting question. I don't know that I have a great answer to it. To me, if I go to the Met or something, I think that the ability of art to bring us into the present, and then there's a depth of the present. That I think that I'm not an expert on the Hudson River painters, but to me, art is about great art pulls me in, and I'm there. I'm here. I'm right here. Mm-hmm. I'm not thinking about other, So in that sense, that's the way to me art is powerful. Is that I'm up here. I'm absorbed in this image, right here, standing here. Usually that's not when you're not looking at Starry Night because there's 150 other people doing it at the same time. You have to look at something else, less celebrated for that. Anyway, it's a good question.
One thing that occurred to me as you were speaking, Chad, is that magnificent line from Shakespeare's Hamlet. I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself king of infinite space. And that's been one of my favorite quotes all my life since I was a college student and read that the first time. And I somewhat took that to myself. I can be bounded in a nutshell and count myself queen of infinite space. So there's that duality of both and, that the most cramping experiences of our lives can also open us up to infinite space.
That's great. I just wrote that down. I think that's great. I need to think more about that before I send this paper to a publisher. Mary, I believe you're right. I think that's a great point.
Well, Mary, as you said that beautiful quote from Hamlet, I thought what a perfect counterpoint to Julian of Norwich's vision of the universe as a hazelnut. It's exactly, I mean, that's perfect. What a great juxtaposition.
And as we know, Julian was an anchoress, so she lived her life in a very small space. Penny,
yeah, I would love to
to
speak to Father Garrick's observation about art.
Oh, please.
I love to go to art museums. I grew up near San Francisco, so and so the last time my son lives in Pittsburgh and the Carnegie Museum system is there, and the last time I took my iPad, and I was absolutely stunned because I'd seen people do this and it's actually recommended there. So you put the iPad up to a painting and there was a Renoir. There's a Renoir there on the second floor. It's only about 18 inches by 3.5 feet. And there were 3 paintings. There was a painting you saw, but with my iPad, I could see a second full painting and even a third full painting in the foreground. I stayed there for 2 hours and I'm still blown away. But the thing with the iPad is you can take pictures of it and then come home and ponder it. And so then I started thinking, how many other masters painted a painting within a painting? So I want to put something else out there. There is a book out there, and you might be able to find it, Chad, but there is a book out there. My friend had told me about it, and she saw it in a seminary class that she was in California. It's called For His Eyes Only. For His Eyes Only. As they were renovating the great cathedrals of Europe, they found within the walls beautiful paintings and sculptures and works of art that were put in the walls for his eyes only. And so my friend saw the book. The professor was, of course, not going to part with this book, but she saw the paintings that were in the walls for God's eyes only. So that again shows another vastness to those cathedrals that we don't even think about. But I encourage you, when next time you go to an art museum, take your iPad, look at the great masters and see what you see within and the vastness of the painting within.
That's great. I love that. Thanks, Penny.
Okay, one more reflection and then we're just about out of time, okay? Who has one more reflection or question?
I'll say a quick something. Thank you, Chad, and thanks for everyone for all their comments. It's been really provocative to think about open space and how it can enhance a contemplative attitude. And Mary, I'm on the same page with you that it seems to be a real dualistic piece, that although vastness can the vastness of spaces, for me personally, can certainly enhance a contemplative space for me. I have to say that small spaces, I think I'm at a point now where it doesn't matter whether it's a big space or a little space. It just sort of seems to be vastness is everywhere, no matter what happens. And I had just been, as many of you know, I have these 4 little grandkids, and boy, if you ever wanted to practice being in the present moment, it's watching kids under 5. But my granddaughter, I think about a month or so ago, was in my backyard, and I'm handing her little flowers from my garden, saying, look at this one, look at that one, you know, check it all out, look at, and it was almost like she was looking at each and everything with a vast perspective. And then all of a sudden she got on the swing and she said, you know, I don't think I like God very much, Granny. And I said, why not? She said, my eyes are so full of beauty that I don't know where to put them anymore. Wow. And I thought to myself, you got it, you got it. And I thought to myself, through the eyes of a child, again, it's been such a
that's beautiful
practice for me, enhancing my contemplative practice. So, but I just like the notion that vastness is everywhere, just like the Buddhist meditation, the big sky meditation. You just, somewhere along the day, just peek out your window, even if you're in an apartment, to see the sky, the vastness, like you were talking about, Chad. Yeah, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I'm really sorry we're kind of coming to the end of our time with Chad this evening, but Chad, I think the response that you've gotten from your thoughts is indicative. We got to invite you back, maybe even in person. And so I can't thank you enough for I think this very significant work you're doing today to help move us where we need to go in the future. So keep up the good work and inspire other people like ourselves to be about it ourselves. So thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks for the invitation. Nice to meet all of you.
Thank you.